And with that, tonight's guest speaker is Cameron Darnell. I've heard that through arrangement with Hunts, there'll be a 10% discount on select items that Cameron uses in his day-to-day photography. And also there'll be a 10% discount off his fine art prints from Cameron's website. So check those out. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Gary from Hunts to introduce Cameron to us.
Thanks everybody for tuning in for this program. I recognize most everybody on here except for a few people, so I'll just talk briefly about Hunt's Photo and some of the things we have coming up, and then we'll get into tonight's program. But Hunt's Photo is a camera store. We're based in Massachusetts. We ship all over the country. For those who know me have known me for a very long time, they know that I'm really about the customer service and building long-term working relationships with the customers, and not just being there to be a salesperson to you and just take the order, take the credit card and get you off the phone. I'm really there to be a resource, be a friend. I really want to help you out and guide you and find the right equipment to your needs, and really be there more than just to make a sale. So if you're ever looking for anything, I'll put my email down in the chat. Reach out to me. For all the folks that have been loyal fans of Hunt's Photo for many years, I want to thank you guys very much for the support of Hunt's, and it means a lot to me for supporting me. So that's about that. A couple other programs we have coming up. If you want, I can send you information about it. But Monday night, we're actually doing thanks to Canon, I'm doing a night program with Adam Jones. He's going to be presenting for Hunt's Photo on Monday night. Next Saturday, I'm going to be doing an all-day seminar with Tim Gray, a really good Photoshop guy. That's going to be next Saturday. That's an all-day thing. And then I'm also going to be doing a wildlife mirrors program with Hector Historical. He's a great wildlife photographer, and he's going to be co-leading it with Noah Buchanan. And that's also a free program as well. So those are three very exciting programs we have coming up. So if you want, I'll put in an email, and if you guys want to send it out, I'm happy to do that for you. With that being said, this is I met Cameron last year in October through Instagram. He was really one of the first persons that I reached out to, trying to really go after these young photographers and really get them involved with what Hunt's does. And let me just say one thing, because I think there's a thing out there with young photographers that when you talk to young photographers, they think they're all using their phones and not their cameras. I can't speak for around the country, but I can speak for Hunt's Photo and the people that I personally work with. They're all using the cameras and not using their phones. So I just want to make that very clear, that these people I'm working with are using the cameras, not their phones. But I met him on Instagram. We developed an amazing working relationship and a friendship. And this is his, I don't think, believe it or not, this is the 35th program he's done with Hunt's Photo since COVID. And whoever thought I'd be doing 36 programs with him since COVID, I never thought it. Unfortunately, he's going back to school, so I'm going to lose him for a little bit, but he'll always have a special place in my heart. And he's always, when he's ready to do programs again, the doors are always open to do other things together with him. And we do have a special thing coming up, a workshop next year, which Cameron will talk about at the end of the program. But one of the biggest things that I did for Instagram, I'm not really a photographer, but really going on Instagram has really inspired me to do photography, to really maybe try and do photography. And I actually, believe it or not, I actually booked a trip in July to Florida, and I'm going to be going to the Everglades in Florida, and I'm going to spend a week down there. And I decided today that I'm going to take a Nikon Z6, Nikon 500 PF, and maybe a 600mm lens, and I'm going to go and spend a week in the Everglades and try some photography. So we'll see what happens. But all this information, all this stuff out there, really inspiring me to really try some photography. So it's a new path, so we'll see where it goes. But with that being said, I'd like to introduce the Cameron. What you're going to see tonight is going to be very inspirational, inspiring. It's going to blow you guys away. For what the type of thing he does, it's just incredible. So you guys are in for an amazing treat. So that being said, Cameron, it's all yours.
Thanks for that amazing introduction, Gary. I'm super happy to be here in front of you all tonight. It's a bit bittersweet for me today because, as Gary mentioned, this is my last of 36 programs that I've done this year, but I've enjoyed every minute of it, and I'm super excited to give you guys a great program tonight. Tonight's going to be all about creativity and lighting with bird photography. I'm going to talk about how I compose my bird images, how I look for lighting styles and diversity and composition to create an expressive bird portfolio. I have a procedure for questions in my program here. There's a chat at the bottom here, and you can just enter your questions down there, and there's going to be 2 question breaks throughout the duration of the presentation, one in the middle and one at the very end. So I'm going to hop right into the presentation here. Oh, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. Whoever's the host.
Yes, just 1 second. Okay, you should be all set.
All right, great, thanks. So as I said, my name's Cameron Darnell. I've been a birder my whole life. I've loved birds, loved birding since I was a little kid. And about 7 years ago, I picked up a camera for the first time and I loved it immediately. I was hooked. And I love going out and photographing birds, being in nature, watching them and getting great pictures of them. Today, we'll discuss how I like to utilize light and composition to create expressive bird images. The topics that we're going to all go over today will be, firstly, I'll talk about how to use light to your advantage, which will include a discussion of quality as well as direction of lighting that I look for in my bird photography. Secondly, today I'll talk about creative composition. That will include a discussion of how light relates to the background and also to the foreground, as well as some specific stylistic framing choices that I look for when I'm out in the field. Thirdly, I'll talk about how to develop variety in your wildlife portfolio, which will include a discussion of diversity and styling. When I'm photographing birds, I'm looking for different styles and compositions and lighting. And then I'll illustrate this through a species showcase where I show a singular species photographed in multiple different ways to illustrate how I develop variety in a bird portfolio. Lastly, I'll talk about mood and emotion and the roles they play in bird photography. As I said, firstly here, we'll be talking all about lighting. Light really is the foundation of bird photography. It's incredibly important when we're photographing these beautiful creatures. You can have a really great moment, a good background, a really interesting subject, and if the light's not good, the photo is not going to be great as a result. If you have fantastic light, a really cool subject, and a perfect background, that's when you get an incredible bird image. Lighting, in summary, is just, it makes or breaks an image. So this whole first session is going to be how I use lighting to maximize my creative potential in bird photography. The first thing that I like to talk about here is golden hour. Golden hour is the time at sunrise or sunset when the sun is right above the horizon, shining through your whole scene, has this warm golden glow over it. It's kind of right at the end of the day and right at the beginning of the day, and it's just a beautiful time of day, and that's on a sunny day. And your images have these warm tones and saturated colors to them, and also a really good dynamic range and good shadows and highlights. It all just looks more visually pleasing when you photograph things at golden hour, and that's really why I do it. The second tip would be that it's a very time sensitive thing. Golden hour, it's kind of a misnomer because it's not a whole hour that golden hour happens. Sometimes golden hour is like a 20-minute window at the sunrise and a 20-minute window right before the sunset. So bird photography, this type of lighting style that I'm talking about, this golden hour, is incredibly time sensitive. You don't have a lot of time to do it. So it really takes practice to get good photos at this time because, again, it's such a short window. So the thing that I love about golden hour is you have these warm tones on the subject. As you can see of this marbled godwit here, there are gorgeous kind of buff brown tones on this bird that are accentuated nicely by that warm evening light. Secondly, the background always looks good in golden hour because you have these soft tones happening behind the bird. If this portrait were taken in midday sunny light on a sunny day when the sun is bright overhead, looking down on your subject, you'd have harsh shadows and highlights in the background, contrasting look to your background. It just wouldn't look as pleasing and soft as it does here. So those are really the 2 reasons why I love photographing birds in golden hour. Primarily, you have that soft glow over your subject, and secondly, the backgrounds are enhanced at golden hour because you don't have harsh shadows and harsh highlights behind the bird. The next type of lighting that I'd like to discuss, my 2 favorite lighting styles to photograph birds in. Firstly, one is golden hour that I've talked about. And secondly, the time of light that I like to discuss is this pre-sunrise and post-sunset light. So some of you guys may be familiar with what I'm talking about, but a lot of people haven't really considered photographing before the sunrise and after the sunset. What I love to do when I'm photographing birds at especially an open location when there is a nice view of a sunset, like a beach or a lake or something like that, I will stay after the sunset. And also if it's the morning, I'll get there before the sunrise. And the reason for that is because it's really is the perfect time to get creative. The pastel colors in the sky, they act like an artist palette. You have lavenders and pinks and oranges and purples that are just gorgeous in the sky, especially on a sunny day with some clouds, like a partly cloudy day, you have a really good sunset happening. And especially if you're in an open area, you can utilize those colors. You can get some really interesting images at this time of day. My Zoom background over here, and also the person to the right of me, their Zoom background, we have kind of the same time of day going on there. That's what I'm talking about. It's this kind of twilight, dawn, dusk time of day when there are still orange colors in the sky and just kind of the edge of the sun happening, but it's not actual direct light over the horizon. So that's what I'm talking about here, this pre-sunrise and post-sunset light. For this, camera settings may need to be adjusted. You may have to have slower shutter speeds and higher ISO values for this time of day, but for me, the lack in action that you can capture is made up for by the incredible tones and colors that you have in your images. This is an image of a black-bellied plover, one of my favorite shorebirds. They're quite large, kind of monochrome shorebirds that inhabit the beaches in the US. And this bird was in front of just this horizon that was pink and purple and gorgeous. It was this time of day before the sunrise when you have those lavender and pink and purple colors that are happening in the sky that just look really gorgeous and are enhancing this rather monochrome bird. The second image of this time of day here is a glass-like day, no wind on this day at the beach here. And this snowy egret was striking for a small minnow underneath the water. And you had those really interesting pre-sunrise colors happening behind the bird that then reflected down into the water, creating a mirror-like look. And you have this cotton candy rosy color happening in the image. And that's really why I love photographing birds at this time of day. You have creative license and colors that you can get that wouldn't be possible at any other time of day. Like imagine photographing this type of photo at 8 a.m. after the sun is already up. Like you can't replicate it. It really is something that you can create in camera that is special compared to what any other time of day can create. And that's why I love photographing birds at this dawn dusk time of day. So I've talked about quality of lighting thus far, and that's been a discussion of golden hour and that dawn dusk time of day, and that's been front light. But the next thing to think about when we're talking about light with bird photography is the angle or direction the lighting is actually coming from, especially if you have direct lighting. So backlighting is the next thing that I love to do with bird photography. It can be wonderful for enhancing your creativity. Backlighting, it's when the subject is between you and the sun and you're shooting directly into the light. And you need direct light for backlighting. I love to do backlighting at golden hour as well, when you actually have light above the horizon. I'll talk more about backlighting in the next section right here, and I'll also talk more about how I utilize overcast in the next section as well. So one of the reasons why I love backlight is because you have these warm glows over the whole image. You have this tone that only happens in backlighting, kind of in the same way that at that dawn dusk time of day, you have this pink tone over your whole image that only can happen then. Well, with backlighting, when you photograph backlighting at golden hour, when you're shooting right into the sunset, when the light is above the horizon, you have this warm glow that always happens in a backlit image that is irreplicable in any other scenario. So that's why I love photographing backlight, and all these backlit images that I'm going to show in this section right here will have that warm glow. Take a look at this image of this short-eared owl here. It has that warm glow over the whole image. You have oranges happening in the background, yellows as well. And the second thing that I love about backlight that's shown here is you have light that comes through birds' feathers with backlight. And so birds have very translucent feathers, and if you have golden hour light shining through their feathers, it can look really, 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 really interesting. And that's what I had here with this short-eared owl. He was just flying by me with his wings outstretched, and you had this orange golden light coming through his wings, which was a very interesting look. And it's why I love photographing birds in backlighting. Secondly, you have these small willet chicks. They're newborn chicks just running around on this mud flat here. And again, it has those two characteristics that I love about backlighting. Primarily, you have this warm glow in the sky, And then secondly, you have that rim lighting, the outline of the light coming through these birds' feathers happening, which is a real added bonus for backlighting. And it's something that never really happens at any other time of day or any type of lighting. So that's why I love photographing backlighting. Another example here of that glow over the image and also light coming through the bird's feathers is of this really cool bird called a loggerhead shrike. I love these birds. If you don't know a lot about these loggerhead shrike birds, if you've never seen one before, just a little backstory and their kind of lore. Loggerhead shrikes are tiny little songbirds. They are like the size of a bluebird, but they have this really cool ferocity. They can kill sparrows and mice and lizards that are almost as large as them, like a hawk would or like an eagle would, and they will rip them up and impale them on barbed wire and thorns. It's really gruesome, but also quite cool coming from a pint-sized bird. Like you'd expect a bald eagle to do that, but not a little bird that could be on your feeder. So they're really, really interesting creatures. And I wanted to capture that ferocity of this particular species called the loggerhead shrike in this image. And I felt like I did that via backlight. Firstly, you have the backlight coming through this bird's wings, which creates a really intimidating look. The reason its wings were outstretched was because it was a very windy day and it was like 20 miles an hour wind and he was trying to perch on this little twig. So he was spreading his wings out for balance. And then I had backlighting from behind him coming through the wings, illuminating him and creating kind of a glow in his wings. And then also I had that head-on pose where that hooked bill is just looking right at me to create that intimidating mood in this particular image to showcase this interesting bird. So I said I'd talk about cloudy lighting on overcast days, and we're going to do it right here. Overcast lighting is my favorite style for songbirds. And the reason behind that is because overcast at the beach or the lake is not ideal because in those scenarios, you're photographing birds near water and water on cloudy or overcast days appears gray because the cloudy white sky reflects down into the water, making it appear whitish or gray. And on sunny days, you have blue sky reflecting down into the blue water, which makes the water appear blue. And then that looks a lot more visually appealing than gray water does. So that's why I don't photograph birds at the beach or the lake or anywhere near where I'm going to be photographing potentially a bird in water or near water on overcast days. I always like sunny days at sunrise or sunset for that. Now, that being said, cloudy lighting, songbirds don't really live near water, so you don't have that problem. And then secondly, for songbirds, the color green on cloudy days may sound a little odd, but the color green on cloudy days looks really, really good. Something about the way it's saturated on cloudy days, the light's bouncing around in a manner that green just looks really, really good on cloudy days, better than sunny days, in my opinion. So songbirds are almost always found in the forest near a lot of green and leaf litter. So green is often in the backgrounds of songbird images, hence why I photograph songbirds on those cloudy days. So when you're photographing songbirds on cloudy days, composition in your images becomes crucial to creating expressive images because your creativity through lighting has been taken away. You don't have creative license through golden hour or sunset lighting. You just have flat, cloudy light that's pretty soft, and some would say boring. So you try to look for composition in kind of plants and interesting styles and interesting angles for your songbirds. I love photographing songbirds. They can be really, really gorgeous. This is one of the prettiest songbirds in the world, I'd say. This is called a Blackburnian warbler, and they inhabit the Northeast US. New York's actually a great place to find them, especially upstate. And they have that flaming orange throat that contrasts really prettily with that black and white body. And I photographed this bird in the forest. And as you can see, as I was saying, you have a lot of green in the background, and that green color is very much enhanced on the ferns here, on the moss, on the mountain slope here that's green in the background. And it's an example of why I photograph songbirds on cloudy days. Another example of a songbird photographed on a cloudy day in the forest with a green background is this image of a cerulean warbler. Cerulean warblers are really interesting songbirds. They have this very specific shade of cerulean blue, and I think they look really nice, especially contrasted with that green background. A note about this foreground here, what's happening here in the foreground, this cerulean warbler was perched on a sweet birch branch, and in front of him there was another sweet birch tree right next to my lens. So I shot through that foreground sweet birch tree at an f4 aperture. It blurred the foreground there, and I angled him just right so that it was just kind of lining up with him here, and there were no in focus elements in the foreground to create a look where this warbler is almost floating on a green background. I did this particularly because as I said, when you're photographing birds on cloudy days, you have to look for creative compositions because there's not really anything creative about the lighting in this image. It's pretty bland lighting. So I wanted to look for something unique where I had an interesting foreground that was adding to the image. In part one, that's all been about light today. I've discussed how light can make your images more dynamic. And secondly, I've talked about how to make the most of photography on an overcast day. So the summary of those 2 points there is the sunrise and the sunset on a sunny day in an open area is best for bird photography. And then cloudy days all day, any time of day on a cloudy day is best for songbird photography. And then on a sunny day at that sunrise and sunset, you want to look for that golden hour and the dawn dusk kind of pink purple time of day. And then on overcast days, you want to look for birds that have green backgrounds and especially songbirds. Secondly, today we'll talk about creative composition. Light relates directly to the quality of the background. If you have overhead harsh lighting on a sunny day at midday, your background's not going to look very good because you'll have harsh shadows and highlights all over the background. So if you have really flat light, like soft light on a cloudy day, the background's going to be very uniform and it's not going to be distracting from your bird. If you have sunrise and sunset lighting, then it's also going to be good as well. You want generally a background that's not distracting. And if you have elements that are overexposed and underexposed, as you would if you have sun coming directly from overhead, your background will be distracting. So that's why the main reason why I don't like to photograph birds at midday on a sunny day. Backgrounds are incredibly crucial when photographing birds. They really make or break an image, I would say. The difference between a good image and a fantastic one is often the quality of the background. This background here was created by red maple leaves in fall at the edge of a pond. They were reflecting down into the water after being illuminated by golden hour sunset. This northern shoveler was in shade, and I lined him up right in the little area where those pigments were reflecting down into the water of that gorgeous red maple color. And then I lined him up directly in that and then clicked this image. So this is an example of looking for a unique background, a colorful one, but also an out of focus one. You may notice in a lot of these images in the presentation, I am shooting backgrounds that are out of focus. That's done by an f4 aperture for a shallow depth of field. That's also done by having a non-distracting background that's out of focus and distant. So if you have a background that's very close to your subject, it's going to be in focus and distracting. If you have a background that's very distant from your subject, it's going to be out of focus, and you're going to have these out of focus backgrounds that, in my opinion, enhance the subject more because you don't have distraction in the background. Your eye just goes right to the subject. So that's how I create these backgrounds that are often very out of focus. And I like that style because your eye is drawn directly to the bird and you don't have a lot of in focus elements in the background to potentially distract the viewer's eye. Another example here of one of my more unique backgrounds here is this short-eared owl. These gorgeous owls are just flying around these meadows at dusk. There are a lot of owls in upstate New York and New York itself as well. So I'm sure some of you guys on this presentation today have done photography with short-eared owls before. They're one of my favorite birds to photograph, and this shot was taken in Delaware. And he's just flying at this meadow at dusk, and I had golden hour light coming from the left here, just illuminating him from the back. And then there are these golden rushes in the foreground. There are these golden rushes in the foregrounds here, just being illuminated from the back by that backlighting. And it's an example of a background that's out of focus enough to not be distracting, but also colorful enough to add something to the scene. I tend to look for backgrounds that are not kind of brown or bland. I try to add color to my backgrounds in the field, of course, looking for colorful backgrounds, and then also out of focus backgrounds as well. The next thing that I'd like to discuss today that's more of a stylistic framing choice, a little bit more of an advanced concept than just looking for good backgrounds, is small in frame. Some people call it the environmental shot. And the small in frame shot is essentially just showing more of the scene. It's a wider perspective and the bird is very small in the frame. Some people call it birdscape as well. It's kind of like a landscape with a bird in it. In my opinion, it's the most difficult style of image to execute effectively. You need subject isolation for it. I was talking about subject isolation just now. That's when I was talking about how distant your background is from your subject and whether it's out of focus or not. That's subject isolation. You want good subject isolation where the background's distant from your subject so it'll stand out, because it's hard to get a subject to stand out in a small frame shot because it's so distant. Again, that smaller frame image shows more of the scene, tries to transport the viewer into the field, and is trying to tell a story of a bird in its habitat. This is one of my small frame images. It's a Louisiana water thrush, and this bird was just singing on this curved log here on its stream, mossy stream habitat. These Louisiana water thrushes have a gorgeous habitat. They live on these bubbling brooks and streams in the northeast US, and they are just gorgeous birds. They live, again, on those streams, and you have these mossy rocks, textured logs, lichen, rushing water, and I wanted to showcase that habitat here. You can see the kind of waterfall below it. You have some mossy rocks for perspective, and then you have this really, really interesting log that he was walking across. And it's just an example of, I could have cropped this portrait or zoomed in on this bird just really closely and had a detailed portrait with him really sharp, close up, this mossy detail close up. But I decided to step back a little bit and showcase this water underneath him, a wider perspective to enhance that sense of habitat in the image. A second example of more of a small frame shot here is a yellow-rumped warbler. And again, I could have done the same thing with getting closer to this bird, cropping it really, really close. So you just had a nice close portrait of a beautiful bird on a spruce bough, but I wanted to give more of a sense of place. I feel like this image here lets you know this bird's habitat a little bit better because you can see the whole tree, and you also have this impression of this other tree beyond him, just showcasing that boreal forest habitat that this bird lives in. And again, an example of stepping back, having a wider perspective in an attempt to transport the viewer to the field and create a situation where you can tell a story of the bird in its particular habitat. My last example here of small frame is this small frame shot of an indigo bunting. This was taken last summer, a half hour from my house. And this indigo bunting was just sitting around and feeding and perching on these sunflower tops here in this sunflower field. And I went there during the peak bloom. Actually, the perch that he's on is not blooming, but all the other ones on. That's interesting. So it was peak bloom in this image. And these sunflowers were just gorgeous. There were these pillowy yellow, beautiful gems happening here. And that contrast with the indigo bunting was quite nice. So I wanted to take a step back and showcase the whole scene that was happening here. I had that f4 aperture, so these foreground sunflowers went out of focus here. And then I also had a sunset happening in the background with interesting colors and lighting coming through the trees. And it's just an example of the bird is pretty far away. You don't have a lot of detail on the subject here from the viewer's eye because it's pretty small in frame, but you have these interesting impressions of the sunflower fields, the color at the top of the image that you would have lost if you had gotten a close portrait. And that's really why one would decide to go small in frame and take a small in frame image, is because there are details in the whole scene that you're looking at that would be lost if you got a close portrait. So you decide to take a step back and showcase the whole scene. The exact opposite, a complete flip of that, are images that highlight detail. They're extreme close-up moments that tend to be closer than a regular portrait that can produce incredible images. They are an attempt to showcase the subject's plumage intricacy. And for any of you all that are macro photographers, I know this isn't macro photography, but it's as close as I come as a bird photographer to macro photography. This is, again, a Louisiana water thrush, same bird that I showed earlier on in the small and frame section, except a completely different image of him very close up, a perch on this textured mossy rock with little flowers near the rock as well. There were these marigold flowers growing right next to the riverbank, and there was this mossy rock that this bird was hopping on, and I clicked this image of him very close up to me with the texture of the plants and texture of the flowers and sharpness on the bird to showcase that smaller detail and zoom in a little bit. The next thing I'd like to talk about today is behavior and how to capture behavior in bird photography. Knowing the behavior and habits of your subject helps you anticipate the decisive moment. And this slide really is applicable to any type of wildlife photography. It's not just bird photography. The things that I'm talking about with behavior here can apply to mammal, reptile, anything like that. For capturing behavior in bird photography, binoculars are a crucial tool. I always have binoculars on me. I use the Zeiss Terra ED binoculars, which will be available for special at hunts. They're a great pair of binoculars to use. And for behavior, my kind of philosophy for it is I like to control what I can. There are so many aspects of capturing fast action and behavior of a bird that you can't control. You can't control what the bird's going to do. You can't control how it's feeling that day. You can't pick it up and tell it, okay, flap your wings right now. It's just not going to happen. So you have to control the aspects that you can control. That being said, you can control quality of lighting, quality of your composition, and your prior knowledge of your subject. If you know your subject, if you have a lot of background knowledge on the bird that you're photographing, or just the species in general that you're photographing, your ability to anticipate the decisive moment when action happens will be far greater. And then the last thing that you can control that's a little harder because it requires shelling out money is frame rate. Frame rate is incredibly important for capturing action. If you have 16 frames a second as opposed to 5 frames a second, you're going to capture more action as a result. This is one of my action bird images. This is a bird called a snowy egret. And they're one of my favorite birds. And this is one of my favorite behaviors of any bird. I wanted to capture this behavior. I went out in the marsh one evening at sunset and wanted to capture this image of the snowy egret. There's this really interesting behavior they do where they're feeding. They're feeding for fish. They're fish-eating birds. And there are these minnows underneath the water in this picture. You can't see them, but they're underneath the water. And he saw them and was chasing them all over the marsh, just spreading his wings out for balance and dancing and leaping for these fish. It looks like a ballet, especially if you watch it from afar. So they're very, very interesting birds. And I wanted to capture that behavior. So I controlled my quality of lighting. I went there at sunset. I didn't go there at a time of day where I would have bad lighting. I controlled my composition. I had a scenario where there was a distant marsh background that would create a nice green blur in the background. I didn't have a scenario where you had a distracting background because I just positioned myself so that it would happen. And then I waited for this bird to do this particular behavior. And I also had a camera. I used the 7D Mark II from Canon. That doesn't have a ridiculously high frame rate, but it has a high enough frame rate to capture good action. I think it's about 9 frames per second. And I spammed the shutter button, just held it down when he did this particular wing flapping pose and clicked this image as a result. So it was a combination of knowing this particular behavior and looking for it. I definitely heard about it beforehand and wanted to capture it. Secondly, it was a result of a higher frame rate, also controlling my quality of lighting and composition. That all kind of, it was a mixture of things that added to the creation of this image. Another example here of a less glamorous behavior, but an interesting one nonetheless, is this songbird called a golden-winged warbler. And they're a quite rare, interesting species of songbird that lives in the Northeast US. Again, New York's a great state for photography, people. These golden-winged warblers, best spot is New York. So, you know, go out and photograph birds. I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but New York's fantastic for bird photography, so I'd really take advantage of that. These golden-winged warblers breed in the Northeast US, and they're really, really pretty birds. They have these golden wings and this golden cap here and this interesting facial marking. And they do this interesting behavior called forage gleaning, where they tuck their bills on the undersides of leaves, as you can see he's doing here, for small inchworms and larvae and things that are underneath maple leaves. And it's a really interesting behavior they do in the spring. And I capture this really short moment here where he's tucking his bill under the underside of this red maple leaf, doing this forage gleaning behavior. And the manner in which I captured this, I was very patient, just waiting for this bird to do it. I knew that he was going to do this behavior eventually because it was spring and he was trying to feed his young and everything. So, you know, I just waited for it and captured this behavior where he did this forage gleaning. In part 2 today, I discussed how to get creative with foregrounds and backgrounds. Secondly, I discussed stylistic framing choices, including small and frame shots, detailed close-ups, and behavioral bird images. Just before the question break, now's the time to input any questions that you may have. I'm going to do a question break right after this slide. But while you guys are doing that, I'd like to make a note about post-processing. Some of you guys may be curious about that. I use Adobe Lightroom and Adobe Photoshop when I post-process my bird images. The things generally that I do are color, contrast, exposure, sharpening, crop, and undesired object removal adjustments in Photoshop. My goal, my philosophy for post-processing is to replicate what my eye saw in the field. I try to bring to life what my eye was viewing in the field. And then secondly, the specifics of my workflow are complex, far, far more complex than what you see on this slide. But feel free to send me an email about how I learn more about how I process my images in greater detail, I will link my email in the Zoom chat during the question break. All right, Gary, just give me a second to link that email here for you all, and then I'll get right to the questions. All right, I'm ready to go.
Okay. So what advice can you give to reduce exposure noise while shooting during the golden hour? I'm assuming that it can be quite dim that you're using ISO.
Yeah, so I'm generally shooting at fairly high ISO values during golden hour because, again, there's not a lot of light in the scene. I would say that a lot of it depends on your camera body. If you have a camera body that has low noise value, and you really can't shoot above, say, 1,000 or 2,000 ISO, it's really tough. But if you have a good camera, that generally does well with noise performance, there is this software called Topaz Denoise AI. I'm sure some of you guys have heard of it. It really can just take kind of an average camera as far as noise performance goes, and then you process the image on the computer, and then it's like a professional level camera as far as noise performance goes. So Topaz Denoise AI is just a software plugin that you do on your computer. I think it's $69, $69.99 or something. And it's really, really useful. I use it for all my images, and you just upload the image into the software, and it processes it, gets rid of the noise. And I'm not being sponsored by Topaz or anything here. I'm just, saying I use this all the time. And it's a fantastic software for noise reduction. So that's generally the thing that I do for noise reduction. And then just the second element of that is just having a camera with decent noise performance is the thing that goes in tandem with Topaz Denoise AI.
Which lenses you tend to use?
Which lenses do I tend to use? I use the Canon 500mm lens, f4 lens.
Okay.
That's really the only one that I bring regularly with me in the field.
You're using an APS-C body?
Yeah, I use a Canon 7D Mark II.
Okay.
Yep. I like the crop sensor. It gives that little bit of extra reach, especially for bird photography.
All right, and the other question that came through, the $1 million question, so you can address that.
Yeah, I already know what it is. 35 of these, and every single one, someone's asked flash. So I don't use flash in my bird photography. The reason behind that is because flash, they asked about a flash extender, so that's why I don't use it. Flash requires a lot of pieces of equipment to do it accurately. You can just use the flash on the camera and it's fine, but to do flash well, the people that do it well, they bring like 4 or 5 separate pieces of equipment with them in the field: an extender, a better beamer, cord, flash. They bring a lot of things, and it's kind of cumbersome. It's a hassle. It's a lot to deal with. So that's the reason I don't use it. And what I do to compensate for that is in Adobe Photoshop, I will selectively edit the subject, the bird. I will raise the shadows, brighten the shadows on that bird, and sort of mimic what a flash would do in the field. It's a subtle thing to do. If I showed you the before and after, it would be almost a little bit hard to tell the difference. But if you just raise the shadows a little bit just on the subject, that mimics a flash in the field. So that's why I do it. I don't have to carry all that flash equipment, and I can just do it in post-production. So that's why I don't use flash. I do know people who have used flash and get great results, and I actually have tried flash myself. But yeah, it just hasn't been for me overall.
And then the other $1 million question.
ISO?
No, do you always use
tripod?
Okay.
Tripod. So I use a tripod probably 5% of the time. I do not always use a tripod. I am almost always using a monopod or a ground pod for bird photography. And the only scenario where I use a tripod is if I'm waiting for a bird in a blind, and you're sitting still, you're waiting for like a kingfisher to land on a perch, and you're in a blind at the edge of a pond, and you're waiting for 3 hours, and you need that tripod because you don't want to hold your lens. That's when I'll use a tripod. For a monopod, if I'm photographing warblers or songbirds in the forest and the birds are at eye level, then you want to have a monopod where you're more mobile than a tripod. I don't like to have a tripod when I'm moving around because it's just too heavy and cumbersome, and you have all those 3 legs moving around. Just with a monopod, it's a lot more simple to change your perspective. And then with a ground pod, it's just a flat disc-like device where you just have panning motion, and it's just a great piece of equipment. I use the skimmer ground pod too, and it's a way to have that tripod stability when you're lying on the ground prone for shorebird photography or duck photography.
And then what ISO do you use?
It really varies. It's like from all the way up the the spectrum. I'll just go from ISO 100 at the bottom, and then I'll go up to as far as 6400 is the absolute maximum on my 7D Mark II as far as a usable image. I will be using 2000, 3200, 2500, 1000, 1600. That's kind of the general range I'm using, pretty high, because I don't do a lot of photography where there is midday sunlight and a lot of available light. I'm either photographing at sunrise and sunset on a sunny day or on a cloudy day. So I'm generally not using ISO 100, ISO 800 very often. I'm usually 1000 or higher for my ISO values, but it really varies. I've taken images at ISO 100 and ISO 6400, so it varies depending on the scenario.
All right. Do you have any other questions? You can put them in the chat, and then we'll address them during the last session. So.
Great. Yeah, I'll just continue. And then there's a question break at the end for any of your guys' questions that may have arisen while I've been talking from now on. The third part that I'm going to talk about today is developing variety in your portfolio. Variety is what makes photography interesting. If you have a portfolio that you're looking at and this person is having incredible images, they're getting incredible images of a bird in backlighting, a bird in golden hour front light, a bird at dawn and dusk. They have small in frame, detailed close-up, really unique compositions, including some foreground blurred elements, including a really interesting sunset, a background. They have different styles of lighting, composition, and it all comes together to create this impressive visual showcase of birds. And then on the other hand, I see people who take great images, but they have kind of one sort of image that they tend to do a lot, like a front lit portrait, close up, far away background, decent light. And it kind of looks like kind of the same thing over and over again. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's what they want to do. But the photographers that I tend to admire, they always have that variety look where they have different compositions and different styles of lighting and composition, which to me is really impressive. So I always try to achieve variety through outstanding lighting and unique compositions. And the physical way that I do that in the field is I think when I'm photographing birds, every time I'm photographing a bird, I think, what else can I do? I click a certain shot. Then after I click that shot, I think, okay, what else can I do with this scenario? If the bird's obviously not flying away, if it's staying for a little while or something, I think to myself, what else can I do? Can I back up to get small in frame? Can I get closer to get a detailed portrait? Can I change my angle to get backlighting? Can I include some foreground elements? Can I move to get a better background? I'm always thinking about the other things that I can do to get different images. And then when I'm photographing a bird and say it's there for 10 minutes, we'll walk away with 5 different images instead of just one portrait that I'm clicking over and over again. So that's really the way that I try to develop variety in my bird portfolio. To illustrate this better, I will do a species showcase at the moment. This is exactly what I've been talking about, a single bird. And this bird that I'm going to talk about today is a short-billed dowitcher, just a single bird photographed in 5 different ways. These images were taken on 2 separate days at the exact same location with the exact same equipment. And note how each image features different composition and light. All of these images, they were taken on 2 separate days, but they were taken the whole time that I was taking these images before was probably 20 minutes, just 10 minutes one day and 10 minutes the other day. So just try to note how I'm trying to develop variety here in this portfolio. This again is that short-billed dowitcher, and he's feeding at golden hour. There are those gorgeous tones that you have only at golden hour. The light, as you can see in the catch light inside, is above the horizon, and you have that distant ocean background happening. That's kind of your standard portrait. And then I tried to think, what else can I do in this scenario? I changed my angle, moved around 180 degrees, and got backlighting in this instance. This is the same bird, but just photographed with the completely different sun angle. And you have these fiery tones in the water happening that were really interesting, and something that I hadn't gotten before this species. Next, here is a silhouette. As the sun started to set over the ocean, it was starting to form kind of a ball. And as it started to dip below the ocean, or the bay, actually, as it started to dip below the bay, I lined up this short-billed dowitcher right in the trail of the sun on the water. And there was actually a little water droplet coming from its beak here. And this is an example of that different image, trying to think, what else can I do? Can I just completely create something that I haven't gotten before here by changing my angle, by changing my settings, changing my composition? And a quick note on exposure here, I underexposed the heck out of this image to ensure that that sun wasn't completely overexposed. This was a very high shutter speed and low ISO value here, so I underexposed it a lot in this instance. Now, kind of a different mood here, more of a pastel, smooth, calm mood, is him just in this tidal area with these cotton candy colors in the sky and water happening after a sunset. There wasn't much light available in this scenario, but there was enough to get a front lit portrait. And then I had these interesting soft pink tones in the background. When there wasn't enough light after this picture to get a detailed portrait, I went for a silhouette here where you have just the shape, the impression of the bird that's all black against that really pretty magenta color happening. And this is an example of trying to capture a different image that I hadn't gotten before of this short-billed dowitcher. Let's do a second species showcase here. It's a prothonotary warbler, a songbird. And these same things, these 5 images were taken on 2 separate days at the exact same location with the same equipment. Note how each image features different composition and light. The first image here of this prothonotary warbler is him singing out on this stump in the rain. It's a standard portrait. I like it, but it's not anything really, really special. It's just kind of the first shot that I got. I thought when I was clicking this image, I thought, yeah, I got a good shot of this bird. I thought, what else can I do now? Can I do anything different? And this next image is a closer look at him. You have a better perch. This kind of perch in the last one's it's interesting, but it's kind of boring at the same time. It's kind of bland, but then this one has these gorgeous mosses and sporophytes in the moss and this interesting pale green and red color. So the perch is definitely an upgrade. The background has these elements of green here, and you have that really interesting close-up look where you can see this feather detail. So it was a little bit of a different portrait and a better one, in my opinion, of this bird that happened a couple minutes later. Then I took a step back and this bird landed on this textured tree stump. And I wanted to, again, incorporate texture into this image. And you have these gnarled kind of knots here with lichen and moss. And it's a smaller way, it's a more distant look at this bird. So you have the scale of the small bird and the massive trunk here, kind of a juxtaposition there of that size. So it's an example of a different image that I hadn't gotten before of this bird. This next image was taken the next morning on a sunny day. And this, again, same bird, and he is in backlighting here. The sun was rising over the swamp where these birds live, creating these interesting impressions of lighting and shadow from behind him in backlighting. And he was singing from his favorite mossy rock. And it was just a different image than I had gotten before. Again, trying to create that variety. This time it was not through composition, it was through lighting. And then earlier on in the sunrise, this is an image that I got of this prothonotary warbler with those really interesting orange colors behind him in the background. They're really fun lemon yellow birds. So that yellow contrasted nicely with that orange, creating an interesting image here. Again, something that I hadn't gotten before this bird, and something also that I hadn't seen a lot of people do, prothonotary warbler in backlight at sunrise. And I just wanted to create something different for a bit of variety in my portfolio. The last topic that we're going to talk about today is mood. Images can make you feel a powerful mood or emotion. Working creatively with lighting, that's an email. Sorry, I'm just going to X out of that. Working creatively with lighting and composition can create a specific mood, which always adds to the appeal of an image. Think of any work of art that you've seen. Think of a painting, a play, a song. a photo, a poem, anything like that, if it makes you feel a mood or emotion, if it makes you feel something, it always is going to add to the appeal of an image. And after all, photography is an art form, so you want your viewer to be moved by your work. So that's, it's not always going to happen. And I'm not saying it does often with me, but that's what I'm going for. I'm trying to shoot for a scenario where I can make the viewer feel a certain mood. This mood here is more of a dramatic mood, in my opinion. This is a common loon, and he's just floating on this calm lake at sunrise. But you have this interesting look behind him that was created by backlight and fog in the morning. And it's this fiery, intense, dramatic look. So I wanted to capture that really interesting mood where it looks like he's on fire. And so that's the certain kind of dramatic moment that I wanted to capture here and translate that drama into the final image as a result. A more serene, calm mood in this scenario, far less dramatic, far less contrasting than that last image, is this more serene image of this common loon. And you have detail on the subject, so you can see his gorgeous field markings here. He's giving this eerie call. And for anyone, this might be particularly moody for anyone that's heard a common loon call. Their eerie, haunting call is just really gorgeous and also scary at the same time because it sounds like a ghost. So I wanted to capture that really interesting kind of moment where you can see him opening his mouth with the water droplets from his bill and create kind of an eerie, haunting, serene mood in this image. This next image is taking a little bit of a haunting mood to a new level. I wanted to replicate Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven, in this scenario. This is not a raven, but it's a common tern. And this tern was silhouetted in a street light rather than the moon. And the reason I did this was because I saw a street light in the background here as I was walking back from the beach. I also saw this common tern and I figured, it's pretty dark outside, so that street light's going to appear nicely. Can I underexpose the whole scenario and silhouette that common tern right in the ball of that street light? Let's try it. So it took me a couple minutes to attain manual focus on this bird, but because it was practically night out. But when I did, I liked the result of that bird right in the silhouette of that street light that appears like a raven with the moon. This next image is a calming, soft image here that gives me a very peaceful mood. These are 3 sea ducks called black scoters, and they are flying by me at a very fast rate. And I panned with them as they were flying by these really pretty lapping waves in lavender sky. And I had a shutter speed that was quite slow at 1/30th of a second. And I did what's called a pan blur here, where you pan with your subject and you have a slow shutter speed to create kind of a dreamy impressionist look. And I wanted to create that feeling where it's a very peaceful motion. The takeaways today from this presentation are leverage lighting to enhance your creativity. And that's done by looking for the best lighting close to sunrise and sunset. Also, you can look for overcast lighting with songbirds. The second tip that I'd give here that's a little bit more specific is try backlighting. A lot of people haven't tried backlighting. Maybe they've taken a couple pictures of backlighting, but they haven't like gone out and said, I'm gonna take backlighting shots today. I'm gonna get a bird with really interesting backlighting. And once you try backlighting and it becomes a little more natural, you can create really amazing images, and your portfolio in any scenario, in any photography scenario, if it's not just birds, it could be macro or anything else. If you try backlighting, it can improve your portfolio a ton just like that. So one of the tips that I give is just go out and try backlighting. It's super fun and it's going to really improve your photography a lot. Next, thinking critically about the compositional elements apart from your subject is a really important way to enhance your images. If you're thinking about the background, if you're thinking about the foreground, if you're thinking about the quality of lighting, if you're thinking about everything but your subject, then your photography is going to improve a lot, because then you're starting to pay attention to the whole scene and the whole working piece of art instead of just focusing in on the subject and nothing else. The next thing that I like to give here, that I like to talk about, is variety. And developing variety and that concept of what else can I do. That's definitely a takeaway from this presentation. And then lastly, try to experiment with mood and try to get so that your viewer will hopefully feel something when they're viewing the image after the fact. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today. I really hope you enjoyed this presentation. I hope you learned something new, and I hope I inspired you to go out and photograph birds creatively. I have a website. I linked it down in the bottom of the Zoom chat there. It's CameronDarnellPhotography.com. I have fine art prints for sale with a 10% discount for you all on that website. If you'd like to connect with me, my Instagram handle is @CameronDarnellPhoto, and I also linked my email down the chat for any questions or comments that you may have. The next thing that we're going to do here, the final thing is going to be a question break at the end here. I'm echoing, Gary. Does everyone hear that? Okay. I'm going to stop my screen share here, and any questions that may have come up, I can answer right now.
Good. Do you want to talk real quick about the main workshop?
Yep, forgot. Yep. So my friend Noah and I hunts photo video, and a professional wildlife photographer named Todd Nettlehorst. We will all be doing a workshop in June 2022 in Booth Bay Harbor, Maine, and it's going to be all about how to enhance your photography in 3 different ways. I will be doing wildlife and bird photography. Todd will be doing macro photography, and Noah will be doing landscape photography. So it really is the ultimate main workshop where you have instruction on 3 different types of photography, all in a long weekend. And that's June 2022. And if you're interested at all, please send me an email and we can get you signed up for that.
All right. The couple of questions came in. You mentioned f-stops and ISO. What shutter speeds do you find is the most useful? You did mention frames per second.
F-stops and shutter speed. So shutter speed, again, same as ISO. It's not just one shutter speed. It really varies greatly on the scenario. If there is a scenario where I have plenty of light and I want to capture action, I will use a high shutter speed, like say 1/4000th of a second, or in that vicinity. If there's a scenario where the subject is not moving at all, but there's not a lot of light, so I can just use a slow shutter speed. Say for a portrait at golden hour, I'll use a shutter speed like 1/500th of a second or something like that. I will go down to 1/200th of a second, especially if I have a tripod, or even lower in really low lighting scenarios. But that's a little more rare. Usually I'm in the 1/500th to 1/4000th of a second range. I mentioned frame per second as well. You asked about that. Frames per second is unrelated to shutter speed. Shutter speed refers to how much time your lens is open to light for each frame. And then frames per second is how many pictures is actually taken per second. So a good frames per second, kind of general for bird photography, you want to be between like 7 and up frames per second, because you want to capture fast action with bird photography. If you have a camera that has like 5 frames per second or 4 frames per second, it's just not going to be taking continuous pictures fast enough to most of the time capture quick action with bird photography. So a camera with around 10 frames per second or higher, or 7 even, is perfect.
What do you wear when you're going to be lying on a damp beach?
I don't lie on damp beach in the winter. So I really don't have to worry about often getting really cold. So oftentimes I will embrace getting a little bit wet. I wear like sometimes I'll wear, it varies depending on the temperature, but say it's like 80 degrees and I'm fine with being cold, you know. I will wear like khaki, not khaki, but like the Columbia makes pants that are like, they look like khakis, but they're like wicking zipper pants. I'll wear those, and I wear like a long sleeve tan shirt. Wear long sleeve shirts if you're damp on the beach, because otherwise your elbows will get ripped up. Don't wear a short sleeve shirt. I've learned that the hard way. So long sleeve shirt, long pants, and that's usually about it. You want to kind of wear something tan so you're blending in with the beach environment. And other than that, it's not much else to wear, especially in the summer. I usually photograph birds at the beach in the summer, so I rarely have to deal with temperatures that are less than 70 or 65 degrees, really.
I'm using a blind to capture the songbird images.
Never use a blind. I never use a blind for songbird images. I am moving around in the forest with a monopod, kind of looking for them and trying to approach them. For his follow-up question, camouflage dress, I don't often wear specific camouflage dress. I do have a coat, like a raincoat with a camo pattern on it. And then I have earth toned clothing. I won't go out and wear a red shirt or a white shirt or black pants or something like that. I usually have like tan, green, brown clothing on to sort of blend in with the environment. Birds aren't super in tune to color. It's more motion that they get afraid of. So it's not a huge deal if you're, standing out a little bit, but you don't want to go in with a red or white shirt. You want to try to, when for bird photography, you want to try to make it something that's an earth tone.
Do you use mosquito repellent?
Depends. Sometimes I am actually going to Alaska next week, and I will be bringing a ton of mosquito repellent and a mosquito net because the flies and mosquitoes up there are supposed to be madness. But some scenarios I don't bring any, so it really depends on the scenario. But yes, I do use mosquito repellent when I need it.
Anybody else have any questions? I actually have a question for you, Cameron. I was on the program. I was on the program last night. I honestly didn't really care for the program very much. But there was a couple things that he said that kind of really kind of caught my eye. But for you that when you do, I know you're big in exercise. Does exercise help your creativity and when you're doing photography? And does eating more healthy, does that help you and make you a better mood, better person to help you and do your photography?
I never thought about, I could do a whole workshop on exercise and nutrition and how it relates to bird photography. No, I guess they're interlinked a little bit. As far as exercise go, I love working out. So I always feel really good. I can kind of get a natural high out of working out. So it definitely makes me in a better frame of mind for being creative. I wouldn't say it's like, if I don't work out, I'm not creative. It's not that direct, but yeah, I'd say it definitely affects it a certain amount, especially my outlook and my mood. And then as far as nutrition, I mean, I've taken some of the best bird shots I've ever taken after a big Domino's pizza or something. So I'm not sure about that one. As far as nutrition goes, just whatever makes you feel, good and in a good mood is what you want to go for.
All right. Yeah, but I mean, for me, during the pandemic type thing, what I really did, it really helped me was going out and going walking every day. If I was having a bad day or I was very stressed, I go out for a 5-mile walk and I come back and I feel so refreshed. Just exercise for me has been a huge thing in my mood and motivating me and making me happier. So
yeah, me too.
Yeah, so I was just curious. That was fine. I found it very interesting, but
yeah, it's very interesting.
Anybody else have any questions for Cameron that you want to ask? Him?
Not really a question. Just want to congratulate him on such a nice vocabulary that basically went nicely beyond leading lines and all sorts of other things that you hear during competitions. I mean, he gave us a feel for why it's okay to go into so many areas that would be just knocked down so quickly in the usual judged contest. That's all. Thank you so much.
Cameron, I wanted your photography spectacular and your organizational skills are spectacular.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really, I mean, I enjoyed this totally because you were organized and everything else and you were clear and simple.
Thank you. Thank you. That's what I'm going for. So that means a lot. Thanks a lot.
So, and what's your email address again? Birdcam?
Yeah, so I'll type it right now. It's birdcam77@gmail.com.
And it's a gift to be simple.
So a couple of closing things I just want to emphasize real quick about the workshop. I want to talk briefly a little bit more about that. And then I forgot to tell this earlier, but for the first time ever, I know I'm really trying to strive on young photographers and really try to build that. That's going to be a really big part of what I do going forward. In-person events, even in-person events, I'm going to try and incorporate young photographers as this country opens back up. But for the first time ever, I'm partnering with Connecticut TPA, Connecticut Professional Photographers. It's going to be, I'll be saying more information about it, but it's going to be, I think the first week in August. It's going to be on a Monday. I'm planning a virtual young photography conference, a one-day event from 10 to 5 with all young photographers. That's going to be a free event. And it's going to be open to everybody. So that's going to be in August. So I'll send you more information about that. But I have a very great lineup that I put together for that. And then just going back to the workshop, I just want to emphasize a little bit, the workshop that we're doing, I think you know about me, I always strive on personalized service and personal touch. So what we're gonna do, that I don't think any other workshop ever done before, but when I go to workshops, I see a lot of people go to workshops and they go and it takes them 4 days to get used to things, get used to the people and stuff like that, and then it's time to go. So anybody that signs up, we're gonna do a Zoom call like a month before. So you get to know all the attendees, you get to know you get a feel for it, and if you have any questions, and you'll be able to do that. And then after the workshop's over, we're gonna come back with another Zoom session. We're gonna do a critique session with Noah, Cameron, and Todd. So it's you're gonna get really bang for your buck, and it's just gonna be a great weekend. And it's gonna be a great time. So if you want more information, just tune in to Cameron, send Cameron an email, and we'll get that to you. We're only taking 21 people, so keeping it small, so you get that personalized service and personal touch. So it's basically seven per group. So that's it. We're not going bigger than that. So just to emphasize that. Any closing words you want to say, Cameron?
I think that's about it for tonight. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to me. And I hope I inspired you about bird photography, and have a good night.
Thank
Can
you
I
very
add
much.
something?
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to add that,
Thank you so much.
thank you, as Stephanie says, but I want to say again, I've heard you before. I'm not a bird photographer, but I learn more about photography from you than some of these hotshot big names that are out there bragging about their work, and yet you come across just straightforward with so much information, and your work is just breathtaking. And I thank you. I
Thank you so much, Deborah. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, it's just.
Thank you. Really wonderful on so many levels.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank
And
you.
also, it's about time we realized, as old farts here, we have nothing. We have nothing to say. Excuse me, I got to take this. I think somebody's hurt. Hello?
I'll second what Deborah said, and I'm not a bird photographer, but I'm inspired now to go find some birds.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, that's what I'm here to do. Make more bird photographers.
Where did you learn
you.
all about these
And
birds?
I'll say that Cameron is a big shot.
Where did you learn all about these birds? Did you read up on them, or just
Yeah. So
observe them?
ever since I was a little guy, I loved animals. I was always like watching Animal Planet and all the little stuff on the TV, and I just would want to go out and look for animals. And birds, just ever since I've been little, have been my favorite animal. So I kind of started to become a birder and look for birds and learn how to identify them, read bird guides, and kind of look at all the birds that I wanted to see. Kind of developed the knowledge of birding from that. Went on some bird walks, and just kind of over like 10 years of that, developed more knowledge about birding. And then, yeah, I'd say, if you want to develop knowledge about birds and birding, get like a hard copy field guide if you don't already have one, and kind of read through it and see what birds frequent your area, and kind of maybe get a feeder as well. That's kind of a great way to get into birding for sure.
Hi, we've been taking pictures of robin, the red-breasted robin.
Yeah.
Because right outside our door, our front door, there's a bush, one of those things, and the robin made a nest there.
Cool.
And had 3 little ones, and we've been taking pictures and videos of them for 3 weeks. We've been following them.
Great.
And we finally got they grew up and flew away, but 2 of them flew away, and I got the picture of that one in the tree in our front yard.
Nice.
But the last one was so little, we kept watching and watching, but the last one was so little that the mother and father, actually both the father and the mother feed them, but they left him for a day and a half, and we got so worried.
Oh, no.
So we brought them, we made a box and put them in.
Mm.
But then we put the box on the porch, and the mother and father came back because he was squawking so much that they came back and started feeding him. But we put a mesh over the top of the box, and he couldn't get out, but the mother came back to feed him, and we opened it up and she started to feed him again.
That's
So he flew
awesome.
away.
What a cool experience.
Yes, we were watching him for 3 weeks every day.
Cool.
That's my story on birds.
Yeah, well, yeah, next time, if that happens again, try to think about backlighting or something like that, next time you photograph and get a, really, really interesting,
Yeah,
unique shot, that's a great opportunity.
we got lots and lots of pictures, backlighting, videos, a lot of stuff on
Nice.
that family. It was great.
Sounds fun.
I also appreciated the emphasis on bird in habitat. Instead of just trying to zoom in, you captured the essence of where they were. And I think that's really terrific, instead of looking to be like the critic or the judge. And they're very beautiful, and you really touch on composition in so many ways. And some of the things that you did also reminded me of what the Japanese woodblock artists did by focusing or putting to the side and not having the whole thing. Really interesting.
They do a lot of minimalism.
Yep.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, that's definitely a trend in their work for sure. And the small and frame thing, I can't say I created it myself. I've learned from some great photographers about how to do small and frame properly. And I really like the style myself, so I've practiced it a lot. So yeah, thanks for that great comment.
Yeah, I mean, Whistler learned from the Japanese, other artists, William Merritt Chase. So yes, why not photographers?
Yeah.
Cameron, I have a question about shooting shorebirds.
Yeah.
You seem to take preference to having a very low angle. Do you think that there are other angles that are attractive for shorebirds?
I guess there could be in a scenario where you would have a scenario where maybe you're on a jetty. Some people, I've seen scenarios where shorebirds are on a jetty and they're looking down on them and they get kind of an overhead perspective of the shorebird.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen images of that are stunning. But as far as getting like sitting, a couple feet off the ground as opposed to a low angle, in my opinion, a low angle is always going to be superior to that, just because of the quality of the background. You're on eye level, so it's going to be far more engaging. You're just looking right into the eye of the bird. And your background's also less in focus. I guess there could be a scenario where you'd want to raise your lens a little bit to retain some interesting element of focus in the foreground. Like say there are some nice grasses or something that you want to include and not have it out of focus, then you would raise your lens a little bit, and that would make the foreground a little bit more in focus. But for 90% of scenarios, I'd say that kind of makes the foreground go out of focus. And oftentimes with shorebird photography, you have mud flats and stuff like that. So you can have in focus elements that don't necessarily look good. So you want a background and foreground that are out of focus, hence the low angle. And then you also have that engaging perspective. So the answer is, possibly you could have a scenario where the photo would be better if you raise your lens off the ground a little bit. But for most scenarios, I would envision a low angle would be better.
Crawl on your belly.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Also, the great thing about that is that it spooks the shorebirds less. If you're up, standing or sitting or whatever, as opposed to lying, you're definitely going to spook them more. So when you're lying down, they'll often just kind of come right up to you. So it has two things that are good about it.
Okay.
Any other questions, anyone?
I have a friend who finds a twig in front of a nice background, and he'll sit there for 2 or 3 hours waiting for some random bird, or hopefully the bird he wants, to land on that twig. And he gets, similar to yours, fantastic photographs of these birds, but I don't know what technique you have to get them on.
Of songbirds?
Pardon me?
Of songbirds?
Yes.
Does he have like a water feeder or a drip setup or a feeder? And he puts the perch near it? Like an attractant
That,
of
or
some
he
sort?
just goes in the woods and, or, you know, near a lake.
I would say it's possible that that would be a super, super effective technique due to some sort of attractant where the birds are congregating for some reason. But as far as just going out in the woods and finding a perch and waiting for a bird to land on it, the chances of that are probably pretty low. Maybe he gets, you know, lucky sometimes, but I would say it's probably more likely that there's some sort of like birds like water. So some people set up water drip setups where they bathe and then they put a perch right next to the area and the birds land on the perch and then go to the water. Same can be done with like seeds or food. So that might be something that he's considering, or he just could have a lot of patience and a lot of time. I don't know, but that's really cool.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you're doing shorebirds or other times when you find yourself on your belly, you know, crawling around, do you do everything handheld or do you use like a tripod with the legs splayed out for stability? How do you handle that?
I use a ground pod. So it's called the skimmer ground pod. And it's just a flat kind of pan disc-like device with a head with a screw in it. And then you put your head on it, screw it in, and then you just lay it flat on the ground. You have panning motion on either side. So it's the same concept as the tripod with the legs splayed out, except you don't have any legs to splay out. It's just a flat disc where you have the head.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
That's cool.
Any other questions, anyone?
No.
All right. All right.
Thanks everybody for coming on. Thanks Cameron for another amazing job.
Very nice.
See you.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank you. Good night.
Good presentation.
Thank you.
Good night. Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Back.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.